Hello and thank you for choosing this clean historical Western romance from Indiana Wake. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep sharing more wonderful stories for free. Now, settle in and journey back to the Old West, where love, courage, and second chances are waiting to be found. Copyright Indiana Wake. The Most Wonderful Man by Indiana Wake. Chapter 1. Marie Bamber wandered through the cool morning air with a vague smile on her face. How she loved mornings, especially the ones in which she knew the rest of her day was free. Marie had been helping out in her father's medical practice for the last few months. She wasn't working every single day, just 3 days a week to give Janie some time at home now that she and her new husband were expecting their first baby. Of course, Marie didn't mind at all. She was thrilled for her big sister, even though she'd missed her so much since her wedding the year before. It was silly because she saw her most days. Still, it wasn't quite the same as having her beloved sister all to herself. Marie knew life kept moving, however, and accepted almost every part of life with a smile. She wasn't complacent. She had just worked out a long time ago that it was easier to swim with the tide than against it, especially when there was no earthly chance of that particular tide turning. As for the medical practice, Marie loved working with her father. He was a clever man with a nice temperament and a good sense of humor, and she got along with him very well. But 3 days was enough. Marie liked to have time to wander, for she was still, almost 2 years since they had moved here, exploring Blue Sky Falls. It wasn't a big town in terms of population, but it was sprawling in terms of geography. Sprawling and varied, and she liked it very much. Marie knew she had been the first of her family to take to the dusty Colorado town, and she would never want to go back to the city. She still loved to wake up in the morning, pull back the drapes, and stare out across mile after mile of unfettered countryside. Back home in Boston, when she'd pulled back the drapes, it had been to stare at the large, sky-stealing roof of the house opposite. There was nothing like seeing the sky in the morning. It gave her a sense of freedom and of connection to all that was good. That morning, Marie had walked down by the river. She had such a feeling of peace that even the children running through the town and tearing past her couldn't upend it. A smile crossed her face when she saw the schoolroom doors wide open as the children flew towards them. She hadn't been much of a lover of school herself, and she was certain she would have liked it even less had she been forced to obey Miss Greta Lawrence. Marie had never actually spoken to her but was already certain of her personality. She would undoubtedly be as sharp, pointy, and disapproving as she looked as far as Marie was concerned. All in all, Miss Lawrence was a woman best avoided. Marie would have done just that had it not been for the fracas, which began to unfold just as she passed the schoolroom. A young man, certainly no older than Marie herself, was standing in front of the fierce-looking Miss Lawrence. There were 2 little girls of around 8 years old cowering behind him. There was something about his protective stance which made Marie slow down, her ears pricking up to listen. "Please, Miss Lawrence. It's not that I expect they're learning for free, it's just that I won't have the money until next week. I'll pay you then, you know I will, but please don't make the girls suffer for it." His words stopped Marie in her tracks. She subconsciously searched her pocket, knowing she had some coins in there. "If you have the money next week, the girls will have their lessons next week. You know my rules, young man." Miss Lawrence sounded every bit as condescending as Marie had always imagined she would, and the needlessness of such a tone got her hackles up. What did it cost to have 2 little girls in the classroom? Nothing, that was what. And the young man, who was surely their brother from his obvious youth, had promised to pay, hadn't he? All in all, Marie thought the old schoolmistress something of a heartless crow. "Miss Lawrence, isn't it?" Marie interrupted in an annoyed tone. Surely there can be no risk in taking the girls, can there? If there is, I'm afraid I don't see it. Marie smiled as politely as she could. And I am afraid I don't see what business it is of yours. You don't have a child here, do you? She retorted, her beady eyes narrowed as she looked Marie up and down. It was obvious that she had been found wanting. My sisters, actually. Carly and Susie Bamber, she said, hoping that her youngest sisters wouldn't spend the day suffering for her impertinence. She let her eyes stray to the young man who was eyeing her with some curiosity. He really was no more than her age, and she wondered how it was that he had such huge responsibilities. He was tall and lean, albeit broad, and he had deep golden hair and rich brown eyes. He was neatly turned out, although it was clear that he wasn't a wealthy young man, even by blue sky fall standards. He had a nice, handsome face, despite the fact he didn't look at all happy. And why would he? This woman was impossible. Oh, yes, Miss Lawrence said with a disappointing turn to her mouth. Carly Bamber. Her eyes darkened, and Marie almost laughed. Carly sure could be a cheeky little handful at times. But this isn't helping, is it? Marie prompted, reminding the old crow there were 2 little girls who needed schooling. If you have 2 sisters here, you will know this is not a free school, Miss Bamber. Miss Lawrence was riding high on a wave of severely misplaced dignity. Then, this ought to solve it. Marie snapped as she pressed the coins into the schoolmistress's hand. No, the young man said forcefully, speaking for the first time in minutes. I haven't come looking for charity. As I said, I could pay the money for schooling next week. He looked utterly furious, and Marie realized that his fury wasn't solely directed at the unbending Miss Lawrence, it was for her too. But you could, Marie began falteringly. Come on, girls, let's go, he said, ignoring her attempt as he took his sisters each by the hand and led them away. The girls, neatly but not finely turned out, wandered along at his sides, silent and dejected. It was a heartbreaking sight, one that Marie entirely blamed Miss Lawrence for. She would dissect her own part in the young man's anger later on. Well, that was just about the most dreadful thing I've ever seen, Miss Lawrence, Marie spat angrily. Wasn't it just? Miss Lawrence seemed to be agreeing, which only served to anger her more. I am not talking about that poor young man, I'm talking about you. What sort of woman worth the title of teacher would dream of turning 2 little girls away just for being poor? Oh, your heart bleeds in the wrong direction, my dear. Still, it is often the way with misguided young females, she said and began to walk away. I beg your pardon? Marie was so angry she was almost shouting. They are the Crowley family, or what's left of them, she sneered as if that were explanation enough. Meaning what? Marie had never heard the name. The father was a notorious drunk. Until he died last year, that is. So, I'll believe that young man will have the money when I see it. Like father like son, that's what I say. And did his father ever bother to stand pleading with you so that his children might be educated? When the schoolmistress didn't answer, Marie went on, No, I didn't think so. There, you're like father, like son theory, falls at the first hurdle. Of course, the only suitable explanation now is that you are not at all suited to the privileged position of teaching young minds. And with that, Marie stormed away, leaving Miss Lawrence opening and closing her mouth wordlessly in her fury. Chapter 2. You're in a world of your own today, Marie. I'm all alone, and you might just as well not be here at all, Dr. Bamber said mournfully. Daddy, you sure do know how to be dramatic at times. You're just like Susie." Marie laughed. She loved teasing her father. Luckily, he took it so well. "So, are you going to tell me what's troubling you?" he asked and raised his eyebrows. Marie was always open with her father, never keeping anything back, which was in stark contrast to her older sister, Janie. Marie knew how her father had struggled to communicate with Janie, and just how much it had bruised his heart. So, she had no intention of ever making him guess how she was feeling. She just told him outright. "I think I did something very silly, and I don't know how to take it back," she began, leaning back in her chair and abandoning the files she was barely dealing with in the first place. Marie had a much more relaxed approach to the whole filing arena than Janie, which meant Janie spent much of her 2 days a week looking for the files which Marie had put away in the wrong place. "All right," her father nodded slowly. "What did you do?" "I tried to pay for the week's schooling of 2 little girls." "Why?" "Because their brother didn't have the money. But he told Miss Lawrence he would have it next week and was reduced to almost begging the awful woman not to punish his sisters for his poverty." Now that she was saying it out loud, Marie felt emotional, even a little tearful. The poor young man, how awful. "So, Miss Lawrence wouldn't accept your money?" her father went on. "No, it was the young man himself. He seemed angry and said he wasn't looking for charity." "Well, don't think too harshly of the young man. We all have our pride, Marie. It's me I think harshly of, Daddy. I wish I could have found some better way to help. I feel as if I have insulted him now, and I really didn't mean to. His day was hard enough without me making him feel worse still." "So, he took his sisters away?" "He did." "Oh, but I tore a strip off that old crow, Daddy. And I won't ever be apologizing for it, so don't even try to make me." She held up a hand and wore a mask of defiance. "I wouldn't dream of it." Her father was gently laughing. "I just wish there was something I could do. I wish I could apologize to the young man. Crowley, I think that's what Miss Lawrence said the family name was." She chewed her bottom lip thoughtfully. And she seemed to think that his family name was enough justification for turning 2 little girls away from the schoolroom. "Ah, I see," her father nodded. "You know the family?" "Only a little. I never met Robert Crowley, so I know him only by his reputation. He was a man raising 3 children alone through a haze of alcohol fumes, I believe. By which I mean, he left the raising of the 2 little girls to their brother, Skip." "So, Skip is the young man I met yesterday?" "Yes, there are only the 3 of them now. I've never heard any mention of their mother, so I can only assume she died years ago. The father was only ever in work for as long as it took him to pay for his liquor. I believe there was some thieving too, when he was desperate for a drink. But that doesn't mean that Skip is the same way," she objected. Miss Lawrence said like father like son. "But I don't believe that." "No, neither do I. I've only met Skip Crowley once and found him to be a pleasant young man. He came in with one of his sisters some months ago. She had severe abdominal pains, but it turned out to be nothing more than a kind of colic that was soothed with mint and boiled water. And he was most determined to pay for my time, even though there was no real medicine involved. And then I tried to offer such a proud young man charity," she said and followed it up with a protracted sigh. "You did what you thought was best at the time." "How do they live?" "He is surely only my age. He does odd jobs when he can get them. He is good at maintenance, so he told me when he was here, but the town largely shies away from giving him work. His father was a thief at times, as I said, and, just like Miss Lawrence, most of them are of the like father like son mentality, unfortunately. So, he can't even get himself out of poverty, even though he's willing to work? Finally, tears began to roll down Marie's face. That's awful. That's so unfair. And what about his sisters? How can it be right that they suffer for their father's crimes? It isn't right, honey. Dr. Bamber stood behind his daughter and rested his hands on her shoulders. Look, I did say the last time I saw him that I might ask him to take a look at the roof of the consulting rooms. Why don't I make good on that and ask him to repair the parts which leak? Yes, please, Daddy. But don't say it had anything to do with me or he might not accept the work. I made a big mistake, and I don't want to make another one. Marie sniffed and drew a handkerchief from the sleeve of her dress. Thank you, Daddy. When will you ask him? I'll call around to see him tomorrow, how's that? Perfect, thank you, Marie said and began to feel a little easier. She had made a mistake, but perhaps this would go some way to putting it right. Chapter 3. The roof of the medical practice was like a patchwork quilt of assorted efforts to stop it from leaking. Dr. Bamber had climbed up the ladder behind Skip Crowley as he pointed out what needed to be done. He could add more patches to the many already there, and it would solve the problem for a while longer, or the tiles could be removed, the waterproof backing replaced, and the tiles reinstated. Skip was grateful for a little work, but he left it to Dr. Bamber to decide which way was best. Of course, he was hoping for the most work, and he held his breath. The doctor nodded and told him to have the whole thing properly repaired. Skip smiled. It was something that would easily provide him with a full week's work. It would set him and the girls up for a while at least, and maybe even someone else in town might employ him now. If the town doctor could trust him, why couldn't the rest of the town? On his second day, he saw a woman sitting behind the desk Marie Bamber ordinarily sat behind. He knew it must be one of the doctor's other daughters, although he didn't know her name. What he did know, however, was that she was the young woman who had tried to pay for Katie and Belle's schooling 2 weeks before when he had argued with Miss Lawrence. His stomach had plummeted when he'd first seen her through the window, and he'd hoped to be able to avoid her for the rest of his working week if at all possible. But with her sneaking a peek at him every few minutes, he doubted that would happen. "How are you getting on up there?" she asked about an hour later when she finally made her way outside. "Good, thanks," he said, keeping his focus entirely on the tiles he was carefully removing. He didn't want to come eye to eye with her. The truth was that he wasn't sure if he was more angry at her for trying to help him or more angry at himself for being so ungracious about it. "I have to keep an eye on the weather now these tiles are coming off. If it clouds over, I'll need to pull the oiled cotton sheet over the roof to stop water getting in." It was so much unnecessary detail, but he didn't know what else to talk to her about. "That makes sense," she called up, keeping to her spot, entirely undeterred by his polite avoidance of her. "Have you got a lot of work on at the moment?" she persisted. "Just this," he answered, silently willing her to just go away. "For now," he added, even though he knew that the next job might be weeks away. "How are your sisters?" "They're just fine, thank you," he said, not wanting to get any deeper into the conversation, but knowing he could hardly avoid it. It was the woman's own father employing him after all. "They're in school this week," he added, trying to be friendly through somewhat gritted teeth. "How old are they?" 8. They're twins. Katie and Belle. He had removed 8 tiles and knew he would have to come back down the ladder sooner or later. But when he did, she would have him trapped. "I thought they might be, they're so alike," she said in a friendly, conversational way. "But not identical. I could see the differences between them." "Yes, there are differences." Slowly he made his way down the ladder. being careful to avoid her by concentrating on the climb. Now he was down on the ground. He carefully stacked the tiles he'd brought down from the roof, keeping his back away from her. Many of them could be put back, but some would need to be replaced, and he made a big show of sorting them. Once Skip had sorted all the tiles, he straightened up and faced her for the first time since their awkward meeting outside the schoolroom. She was a pretty young woman, no doubt about it. She had soft-looking brown hair, whereas her older sister had redder hair, more like their mother. Her eyes were hazel, and he realized she took her coloring from her father, the doctor. "Do you do all kinds of building maintenance?" she asked, and he was a little wrong-footed. What an odd question. "Yes. Maintenance or laboring on the farms and ranches when they have a need of someone," he said, hardly remembering a time when any farmer or rancher in Blue Sky Falls had employed him for even a day. "Which do you prefer?" she asked, and he was beginning to think her a nosy sort of busybody. "Maintenance," he replied immediately. The truth was, he didn't care as long as he had some way of putting food on the table. "I'm going to make something hot to drink. My father has gone to the diner to get some pie for us. Which would you rather have? Tea or coffee?" She was smiling brightly at him, and he was certain she was trying hard to overcome the slight animus of their first meeting. He just wished it wasn't quite so obvious. "I don't mind, Miss Bamber. Whichever you're doing suits me," he said, and put a foot on the ladder again, signaling his determination to go back up onto the roof and away from her. "I'll make tea then," she said brightly. "And please, call me Marie." She beamed at him before getting ready to leave him to it. She sure did have a nice smile, and he knew she was trying her very hardest to make amends. And in the end, hadn't she just sought to be kind on that day, just as she was being now? His own pride had been poked hard, but was that really her fault? "I'm Skip," he said in response, wishing that things weren't getting away from him. He needed time to sit and think so that he could properly decide if he liked this young woman or not. "It's nice to meet you, Skip." "It's nice to meet you too, Marie," he said, and smiled just a little. Chapter 4. The following day, Marie was left to her own devices again. It was the first time that she regretted it was Janie's 2 days to work and not her own. It meant she only had 1 day left at the end of the week in which to try to befriend Skip Crowley, and she was certain it wouldn't be enough time. Ever since she had seen the young man surreptitiously wrap the piece of pie her father had given him, Marie wanted to be a friend to him more than ever. It had been immediately obvious to her that Skip was wrapping the piece of pie so that he might take it home to his sisters, and it had almost broken her heart. How could anybody witnessing such a thing ever believe the son to be like the father? Marie knew drinkers to be selfish. Her father had said it so many times from his wide experiences in medicine. This man was anything but. Saving that piece of pie for his sisters was the exact opposite of selfishness. Surely, the two were so far apart. Marie had been given a list of things to collect from town by her mother and ambled along the sunlit street in something of a daydream. If only there was some way to help Skip without making the same mistake she had before. As she was about to walk into the grocery store to collect the small bag of sugar her mother wanted, Marie looked up at the cloudless sky. In doing so, her eye was drawn to several tiles on the very ridge of the grocery store roof, which looked as if they had come adrift somewhat. It felt somehow like an opportunity, almost an answer to a silent prayer. "Good morning, Miss Bamber," the grocer, Mr. Hardcastle, smiled at her. Marie liked Mr. Hardcastle. He was pleasant, friendly, and had the sort of wide and impressive mustache which would have had her absolutely mesmerized as a child. Even now, she was impressed by its enormity. "You must call me Marie, Mr. Hardcastle," she said with a brightness to match his own. I would have, Marie, but at the last minute, I wondered if I had the right sister. I can see the differences between you all, of course, it's just the names that still have me outwitted. There are just so many of you. Carly is the only Bamber girl whose name sticks. Ah, that will be because Carly is the most boisterous, Mr. Hardcastle. The loudest are always the most easily recognized, she said and laughed, setting her small basket down on the counter and wondering if she really could convince Mr. Hardcastle to consider Skip Crowley for his roof repairs. Spirited is a better word, he said, seeming pleased to have a little pleasant company that morning. I'm not sure my mama would agree, Marie went on and was pleased to be amusing the grocer so much. Another fine summer's day for us here in Blue Sky Falls, isn't it? It was clear Mr. Hardcastle wanted to keep the conversation going. It's a lovely day, Mr. Hardcastle. And there certainly is a blue sky here in Blue Sky Falls today. Not a cloud up there at all. Oh, yes, talking of which, she began and hoped the transition wouldn't be too clumsy and obvious. As I was looking up into the beautiful blue sky, I noticed you have a few tiles coming adrift on your roof here, she said, and felt both guilty and pleased to see how startled he was by the news. I wasn't going to mention it, but perhaps you haven't noticed it yourself, Mr. Hardcastle? I hadn't noticed it at all, Marie. Are you in too much of a hurry, or will you point them out? He asked, coming out from behind the counter and already hastening towards the door. I'm in no hurry at all today, Marie said with a secret smile as she followed him out of the store. You have to walk back a little way to see it, she said, urging him further along the street. Here, you can see from here that the line across the top is all uneven. She was pointing and he followed with his eyes. Well, goodness me, it just goes to show you, doesn't it? I must always be looking down at my feet and never up at the sky, he said with a laugh. It would be better to have it fixed before winter comes, Mr. Hardcastle. In fact, we've had some very similar problems ourselves in my father's consulting rooms. Several attempts at repairs have been made over the years, but it seems to have come to a head and is finally time for somebody to do the job properly. Even as we speak, Skip Crowley is taking our own roof back to the bare bones and starting over. Of course, your roof is likely in a much better condition than ours was. Skip Crowley is doing the work, is he? Mr. Hardcastle said with a mixture of surprise and interest. Yes, and my father is really very pleased. He's such an honest young man and was keen that my father had a look at the roof himself so that he could see what a patchwork of repairs it was. He offered to make another patchwork repair or to carefully remove the tiles, replace the weatherproofing beneath, and then put the tiles back on again. My father was so impressed with the young man's honesty that he decided to have him do the job properly. He is employed for the full week, Mr. Hardcastle, and my father says he is doing an exceptional job. She looked at him expectantly, hoping that she wasn't overdoing it. Subtlety was key here, she was sure of it. And he hasn't had any problems with Skip? No, none at all, Marie said and laughed lightly. I mean, I know Miss Lawrence abides by the rule like father like son, but my father is a doctor, and he knows there is no basis for such things in science. She continued to laugh and was pleased when Mr. Hardcastle joined her, albeit he looked a little confused. No, Skip Crowley's only concerns in this world, as far as I can see, are Katie and Belle. Katie and Belle? His little sisters, Marie went on conversationally, trying to keep on top of an urge to sing Skip's praises from the heavens. As long as he has enough to keep them housed and schooled, he seems to be quite content. I suppose it is quite natural that people of the town would assume him to be a drinker like his father, but apparently, it isn't the case, she said and shrugged nonchalantly. Anyway, that is all by the by, he's reliable, honest, and seems to know a good deal about building maintenance. I'm not sure if he has any other jobs lined up currently. You might be lucky and catch him in between this job and the next." Marie could have smiled. She could see by the look on Mr. Hardcastle's face that he had taken the bait. "I wonder if I ought to have a quick word with him, catch the young man before he's off working somewhere else." Mr. Hardcastle looked thoughtful as he twiddled the ends of his mustache. "I would have a word with him myself, Mr. Hardcastle, but I'm not working with my father today or tomorrow, and I have a long list of errands to run for my mother. But do feel free to go up to the consulting rooms and have a word with him yourself. I know my father wouldn't mind at all." She knew she must put off any ideas of her speaking on Mr. Hardcastle's behalf. She mustn't have Skip realize that she had interfered this time. "I might do just that, Marie. I might close up 10 minutes early for dinner today and trot up the road to your father's place and have a word with young Skip," he said, nodding, pleased at having made the decision he assumed he'd absolutely made for himself. "I think you do right, Mr. Hardcastle. It's better to get these things sorted before a trickle becomes a flood, so to speak," Marie said and laughed lightly. "Now then, I must get some sugar for my mother, otherwise, this list of hers will grow longer as if by magic." "Indeed, indeed," Mr. Hardcastle said, laughing like a kindly uncle as he led her back into the grocery store. Now that she had established a system of sorts, Marie really was keen to get moving. She had the rest of the day to herself and all of tomorrow. There was no doubt that she could spot all sorts of building defects in Blue Sky Falls by then. Chapter 5. "And how was school today, girls?" Skip asked when he finally appeared at the one-room shack the Crowley siblings called home. "It was good, Skip. We learned all sorts of things today about America and how big it really is." As always, Katie was the first to speak. Of the two of them, she was just a little more forward. "And we learned about how people came here all the way from Spain and France and England and so many other places so long ago. I reckon I might be French, Skip." "Well, I reckon I'm English," Belle added, and Skip began to laugh. "I'm sure there's a little bit of everything tucked away in our history, girls. The problem is, I don't reckon there's ever a way to find it out, so maybe you're right. Maybe you should just decide for yourselves," he said, still laughing. "Has one of you tried to light a fire?" he asked suddenly, his tone changing as his eye was drawn to the grate. There was some barely blackened kindling in the grate, and he knew that he hadn't left it like that. "I know it's summer, Skip, but it's always so cold in here. No sunshine ever gets in, and it might just as well be winter." There was a little defiance in Katie's eyes, and Skip didn't blame her for a moment. It was a cold and miserable little place to live, that was for sure. "You know how I worry about things like that, Katie. The two of you are only 8 years old, and I live in fear of an ember flying out and landing on the rug. I know I'm protecting you too much, but I can't help it. You know the two of you are all I have in the world, and I'll protect you with my last breath. Unless we freeze to death, of course," Katie said, her hands on her hips as her sister giggled. "Other children our age know how to light fires, Skip." It was Belle's turn to pipe up now. "Yes, and there is a guard. We know how to pull that across and stop the embers from reaching the rug. Look, we can even move the rug back out of the way. I promise you we wouldn't leave the fire, we'd keep an eye on it." "It does get cold in here though," Katie said, wheedling now. "All right then, let's have a look at it, shall we? You have to watch what I'm doing carefully, and you have to promise to follow all the rules, all right?" Skip said with a heavy heart. The truth was he'd known how to light a fire when he had been years younger than the girls were now. He couldn't remember a time when he'd lived the life of a child, although he knew he must have as a helpless infant. That helplessness hadn't been allowed to remain once he'd become old enough to help the mother who was already failing in health. By the time he was 4 or 5, he could light a fire. At 6, he could cut firewood, find kindling, and boil water on a stove he had to stand on a chair to reach. By the time he was 10, and his mother was expecting the twin girls she would never live to see, Skip Crowley had mastered the appalling art of securing his father's attention and anger to spare his mother the pain and suffering when she couldn't manage a moment longer. So, to start with, you need to make a little fire, using the kindling. Skip could hear his voice as if it was somebody else speaking, and he could feel every inch of his reluctance. Just a couple of pieces of newspaper scrunched up like this, see, he said, folding the long pages into strips before curling them around his hand and creating paper coils. Put them under the kindling and light them and then wait. Now, give the flames just a moment or two to take a hold and then put on the first piece of firewood. That's right, one of the smaller ones, he said, smiling at Belle, who had already hand-picked something most suitable. The truth was, the girls had watched him make fires time and time again and probably didn't really need the instruction. All they needed was permission, and that permission would give them confidence. No doubt they had started to light their first little fire and panicked a little as it took hold, leaving it to fizzle out in the grate. But we have to use the tongs to put firewood on, don't we? Katie said, looking at Belle, who set down the piece of firewood and lifted the tongs, carefully picking it up again and gently placing it onto the flaming kindling. Good, very good, Skip said, trying to convince himself that this was a good thing. The girls were going to be on their own more and more in the coming weeks, and summer wasn't going to last forever. He had to let them grow up if only a little. After all, learning to light a fire wasn't the same as learning to attract the blows meant for somebody else. His sisters would never have that sort of life, even if they were poor. How long do we leave this small piece of firewood burning before we put some bigger ones on? Katie asked, bringing him back into the here and now. Just a few minutes, he began. You can see when the fire has taken hold of a bigger piece of wood, look, he said, pointing to the edges of the firewood that Belle had just placed there. You can see the red glow and the ash forming, see? I see. So, shall I put another piece on now? Katie asked, keen to have her turn. Yes, but do it carefully and always use the tongs. And always remember, this is very serious, it's not a game. There's no time to be falling out with each other when you're making a fire. You have to work together, you understand? Yes, both girls said at once. Right, I'll leave the two of you to tend to the fire while I get something ready to eat. He left them to it, despite the fact that his head continually turned back and forth to make sure that everything was all right. In no time at all, he had revived the dying embers inside the stove. The stove was something that he would not teach the girls about until they were older, a good year or two older. He knew it was only by pure luck that he wasn't scalded as a child trying to help his mother, and he most certainly wouldn't risk it for his sisters. He always left bread and butter ready for them when they got home from school so that they could put something into their bellies while they waited for him to return from work. It was something of a new system, a new way of life, for this was the first time ever that Skip Crowley had enjoyed regular work. Ever since Mr. Hardcastle had approached him about fixing the roof of the grocery store, there had been a steady stream of other townsfolk, mostly business owners, who had seen his hard work and decided to give him an opportunity. In those last days of working for Dr. Bamber, more than one person had appeared at the consulting rooms and inquired after the sort of price he might charge to fix this or fix that, to replace this or replace that. His suspicion that it had something to do with Marie Bamber had come to him immediately and had not left him in the weeks and weeks since. However, his sisters needed this, he needed this. If he was ever going to find a way to work through the grinding poverty of their lives, to prove himself, and to make their world better, then he needed to find a way to swallow his pride on this occasion. And what pride was needed in this case? Perhaps she had interfered a little in the beginning, but the work he was getting now was coming from word of mouth. Satisfied customers were passing on their surprise to their neighbors, surprised that the son of Blue Sky Fall's most notorious drunk was an apple who had fallen very much farther from the tree than any of them had guessed he might. "That's an excellent fire, girls," he said, putting the pan of yesterday's stew on top of the stove and stirring it. "Now, pull the guard across and let me see how you do it," he went on, fighting an urge to interfere, to do it himself. But the girls carefully pulled the fire guard across the hearth between them, effectively shielding the room from stray embers. Well done," he said and smiled, nodding hurriedly before turning away and blinking back the tears which had crept up upon him so suddenly. Chapter 6. Marie had kept a very low profile for a number of weeks as she went about the town. She had surreptitiously kept Skip Crowley in sight, insofar as she made it her business always to know where he was working. In that manner, she satisfied herself that her little mission of so many weeks ago had proved to be successful. She had encouraged a handful of local business owners to employ the young man of notorious parentage, and now he seemed to be in constant work. However, when she saw him walking his sisters to the schoolroom on a fine autumn morning, she couldn't resist making an approach. Miss Lawrence was outside, scowling as usual, as children came careering along from all directions, chattering and laughing and enjoying themselves. It was something that Miss Greta Lawrence clearly didn't agree with at all. "Good morning, Skip," she called out brightly, making a point of addressing him and not bothering with Miss Lawrence. "Summer is definitely on its way out, isn't it?" she went on and felt silly casting about for something to say. "Summer is gone, Miss Bamber," he said and laughed. "Marie, remember," she said, not wanting to become suddenly formal with him. "Marie," he said and nodded. "I hope the roof on the doc's office is holding up nicely now that the weather has turned to a little rain here and there," he said, turning his head to look over towards the Bamber family home and single-story consulting rooms. "Finally, it is, yes. I know that my father is extremely pleased with the work you did, and he's happy now that he decided to go ahead with the proper repair rather than another patch-up job," she said and laughed. Without speaking, Miss Lawrence huffed loudly before turning dramatically and marching into the schoolroom, shepherding the stragglers as she went. No sooner was the door to the schoolroom closed than Marie began to laugh. "I must admit, I'm glad Miss Lawrence didn't teach me when I was young. She really is an old crow, isn't she?" Marie said and was pleased when Skip burst out laughing. "She even begins to look like one with her beaky nose and those beady eyes," she went on, realizing that she would be happy to see Skip laugh all day long. He was the sort of young man who rarely had anything to smile about, she'd realized that long ago. But to see him laugh, to see him smile, was to see him at his most handsome, and something about it made Marie feel suddenly a little tongue-tied, a little flustered. His dark golden hair was thick and neatly cut. No doubt, his altered fortunes afforded him more regular visits to the barber at the top end of town than he'd ever enjoyed before. His brown eyes seemed a little brighter somehow, larger, as if he opened them a little wider these days instead of squinting at the world and waiting for another disaster to strike. He was a little fuller in his frame too, having always appeared to her to be tall and broad. He wasn't quite so lean as he had been. Marie would, of course, never forget how he had wrapped that small piece of pie for his sisters, and was as certain now as she was then that he often went without food to make sure that Katie and Belle had everything they needed. Apart from being so suddenly handsome to her, she couldn't deny a man who had such qualities was an attractive character altogether. "I'm just pleased she hasn't taken it out on the girls since they've been back in the schoolroom," Since, he broke off, and she knew he was referring to the day he couldn't afford to pay for their schooling. I think she's equally stern with all the children without letting up. I think it would be hard to see any real difference. She's like that all the time, Marie said and forced herself to look at him, even though she knew now that she was blushing. Why oh why had her heart chosen that precise moment to fall for Skip Crowley? Why couldn't she have fallen for him overnight and given herself time to get used to the idea so that she didn't blush when she saw him? She sure was just the same when I was there, he said and studied her. She knew he could see her blushing. She taught you too? When I was there, yes. My own father wasn't as concerned with educating children as I am, so I didn't get as much schooling as the girls. But Miss Lawrence taught me to read and write, and a few books over the years have taught me the rest. He shrugged his shoulders and looked thoughtfully off into the distance. Greta Lawrence sure is an unpleasant and unfeeling kind of a woman, but I still have that much to be grateful for. If a man can read and write, he can educate himself when the money runs dry. Something about his words made Marie feel suddenly a little small. And I dare say even Miss Lawrence has feelings buried somewhere, she added, wanting him to know she wasn't as unkind as her comments about Miss Lawrence might have made her seem. Deep, Marie. Very deep, he added and laughed again, freeing her from her moment of self-doubt. I'd say you'd need to get a long way beneath the surface to find them. I have no doubt, Marie said and laughed loudly, the laughter of relief. Well, I suppose I ought to get along. I don't want to be late, he said and began to shuffle a little. You're working today? I'm working every day just lately, he said with another broad and handsome smile. And I guess I have you to thank for that, huh? His glassy brown eyes fixed on hers for a moment, and she had the most intense feeling that those eyes could see through any lie she might think to tell. Well, I only mentioned, she began awkwardly, but he cut her off. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm glad to be working at all. Although, I worry a little now about how much time my sisters spend alone at home. He was still smiling, and Marie was glad to be off the hook, so to speak. You have that much work, then? Marie asked, her embarrassment waning as her interest took over. Well, that sure is a good sign. The only day I don't work is Sunday, Marie, although I'm beginning to wish that that wasn't so frowned upon. You need to rest at least one day, surely. Marie said and laughed, suddenly feeling more comfortable now that they had something substantial to talk about. Otherwise, there'll be nothing left of you. I suppose I just want to work as hard as I can for as long as I can. This is the first time I've had so much, you see, and there's a part of me that wonders when it'll dry up again. I guess I just want to keep going while it's here. He shrugged again, and it was so matter-of-fact. There was no self-pity in his words, just what she thought must be a lifetime of the same experiences over and over again. Well, you're certainly getting this work on your own merit. I won't lie to you and deny interfering in the beginning because I'm perfectly well aware that you're smart enough to see that. She was blushing again, but this time for reasons she could quite easily cope with. But I only spoke to a handful of people, and that is all. You've been working for a long time beyond that handful of people, and it's time to give yourself some credit for that. And maybe it's time to trust it too. This is your doing now. This is your own reputation at work. Trust it, Skip, she said and watched his smile fade into something much more serious. He stared right at her for a moment or two, his brown eyes giving nothing away at all. Finally, he began to slowly nod, and his smile returned, a slow, small smile, not a broad grin as before. Perhaps I should, he said and nodded. Well, I'd better get going, he said and took a deep breath as if that would somehow propel him forward. It's nice to see you, she said hurriedly, not knowing how else to end the curious conversation which had been by turns awkward and by other turns confidential, almost intimate. "It's nice to see you too," he said, and nodded his head firmly now before turning to leave her standing outside the schoolroom. Even as he walked away, even as she watched his every step, Marie still didn't know if they were friends or not. Chapter 7. On the very next Saturday morning, Marie awoke with a purpose. It was a little idea that had floated around her mind for some days, ever since she had spoken to Skip outside the schoolroom. She had decided to take Scruffy on his leash and walk out to the edge of town where the Crowley home stood. She'd seen and spoken to the little girls enough that they would know her and wouldn't be at all concerned by her sudden appearance, and she was certain that they would be pleased to see the giant ball of brown woolly fur that was the Bamber family dog. "You look set to go somewhere. Just a walk, is it?" her father asked as he got himself ready for the Saturday morning appointments. He generally worked alone on a Saturday, for not many people came in to see him and he only worked for half the day. "A long walk, Daddy." "To be honest, I'm going up into the woods to spend some time with Skip Crowley's little sisters. I bumped into him the other day, and he said that he works almost every day but Sunday. He's a little worried that his sisters are on their own so much, so I thought I would call in on them." "That's very thoughtful of you, honey," her father began a little cautiously. "And Skip is perfectly happy with that idea, is he? He would be pleased that somebody is giving an eye to his sisters, I'm sure." "That's not quite the same thing, Marie," her father said and narrowed his eyes. "Be careful you don't step over a line, that's all I'm saying." "It's all right, Daddy, I know what I'm doing," Marie said, and brushed aside the little thought which suggested to her that she might actually not. It took more than half an hour to walk out from the Bamber family home to the edge of the woodland on the north side of Blue Sky Falls, where she knew, from a little clever investigation, the Crowley family lived. It didn't take long to identify their home, a small wooden building no bigger than the sitting room in her own family's house. It was a neat little building, painted a pale blue color with a small porch which looked like a new addition. No doubt, Skip had always done everything he could to keep the place well maintained, even if it was small. There was a stone-built chimney on one side of the wooden shack, and she could see smoke rising from it in thick tendrils. So, the girls were surely in, they must be. Marie knocked at the door and waited for a minute or two before it was opened just a little. She recognized Katie Crowley immediately, her eyes as brown as her brother's peering out a little fearfully. Perhaps her brother had instructed her not to open the door to strangers. But surely, everybody knew everybody else in Blue Sky Falls. "Hello, Katie," Marie said, and Katie's expression immediately softened as she opened the door wide. "Oh, you have a dog," Katie said, and immediately darted out onto the porch, dropping to her knees on the wooden slats as she took a more than willing Scruffy into her arms. Belle, come see, Marie Bamber has a dog." In no time at all, Belle had darted out of the little shack too and was on her knees at her sister's side as the two of them made a tremendous fuss of Scruffy. "Would you like to come with me and walk him?" Marie asked brightly. "We wouldn't be going very far." "We can, but we'll have to wait until the fire dies down. Skip doesn't like us to leave the fire burning in case an ember manages to fly out and set fire to the house," Katie said by way of explanation. "All right, perhaps I could come in and wait until the fire dies down then?" Marie asked hopefully. "Yes, it shouldn't take too long," Belle said with excitement. "Come on, Scruffy," she went on, reaching out to take his leash from Marie and leading him immediately into the house. Although the place was tiny, Marie wasn't at all surprised to discover that it was very nicely kept. There were signs that Skip had lately bought one or two new pieces, including a neat and clean-looking couch and some nice material which he had used to partition off the little space his sisters slept in at night. They were only 8, and already, he was thinking of their privacy. It just made her heart open to him more and more. "We would make you something hot to drink, Miss Bamber, but we're not allowed to touch the stove. We are only allowed to keep the fire going as long as we're careful, and that's all." "Well, Katie, that seems very sensible to me. Your brother obviously cares for you very much." "He's always cared for us, Miss Bamber." Belle shrugged. "Our daddy didn't bother too much, and we were a bit afraid of him really," she went on, giving the sort of unabashed detail that only a child would give. "Then it's very lucky that you have such a fine brother, isn't it?" Marie said brightly, wanting the girls to enjoy their day and not be made sad by the circumstances of their lives. "And since I'm here, perhaps I would be able to make a hot drink for us later when we come back from walking Scruffy." "I'm sure Skip wouldn't mind that, would he?" "Oh, no, you're grown up, I'm sure he wouldn't mind," Katie said, and it was clear to Marie there and then that the girls had become attached to her very quickly. As pleased as she was that Skip now had the means to look after them all the better, she was sure that the girls were a little lonely on account of it. And they were hardly included by the rest of town, and so they were left there to wait for him to come back, there on the edge of the woodland in a tiny one-room shack. After the fire had died down enough, the 3 of them enjoyed a wonderful walk around the woodland. The girls threw sticks for Scruffy, who obliged by running back and forth to collect them and return them so that they might be thrown again. As for Marie, she found Katie and Belle to be wonderful company. They were a couple of years younger than her youngest sister, Susie, although she thought they were a little better behaved. Skip had certainly seen to it that they had nice manners and gentle ways, despite the fact that their father had been a notorious drunk. Here she realized that he must have had full responsibility for his little sisters for as long as he could remember, not just since his father had died the year before. Such a man who drank too much would have been next to useless, she was sure, and it made her grieve a little for her new friend's lost childhood. When they returned back to the shack, the girls set to making the fire again, and Marie put a pan of water on the stove to boil to make them all some tea. Scruffy laid on the rug, completely at ease on his back as he patiently waited for the girls to finish their task and turn their attention to rubbing his furry little belly. At just that moment, the door opened, and Skip walked in. His eyes immediately fell to the dog in the center of the rug, and he stopped where he was, the door still wide open as he took it all in. "Oh, hello, Skip," Marie said, turning from the stove and smiling at him, wishing now that she wasn't so busy in his house. Perhaps it would have been better for him to come in and discover her simply sitting on the couch, for he looked at her with barely contained annoyance. "What are you doing?" he asked, walking further into the room and choosing not to close the door. "I just called on the girls earlier, and they helped me walk Scruffy around the woods for a while. They said that you didn't allow them to use the stove, so I offered to make a hot drink before I went is all." Marie felt now as if she were defending herself somehow. "I'm starting to think that my first ideas about you were the right ones, Miss Bamber," he said, reverting to formality in a way that made her heart sink. "I won't deny that you have done me a good turn lately, and I won't deny that the work is very welcome. But you are not welcome to just barge your way in and have a good look around at everything I don't have," he said, his voice strangely flat and angry all at once. "Skip, I didn't come here to pry, for goodness sake," Marie said, feeling little tears of injustice begin to prick her eyes. "You know me better than that. I don't really know you at all, do I? If we did know each other better, you might have told me what you were planning. I'd like you to leave now." "But, Skip," Katie began and then immediately fell silent when she saw the look on her brother's face. "Girls, "Thank Miss Bamber for bringing the dog out to see you," Skip said, and the girls both rose to their feet. "Thank you, Miss Bamber," they said in unison, Belle already beginning to cry. There was nothing else for it but for Marie to take the pan of water off the stove and hurriedly wrap her thick woolen shawl around her shoulders. She wanted to say something, even to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight and she knew that Skip would hear her emotion if she attempted to speak. Instead, Marie blinked hard, determined that her tears wouldn't fall until she was out of the little house and away. She quickly slid Scruffy's leash over his neck but had all manner of trouble getting him to his feet. He was comfortable and warm and had been enjoying a very thorough belly tickling. The little dog was quite determined to stay. In the end, she was forced to pick him up, to carry him under her arms despite the fact that he was heavy and she could barely hold him. The effort was too much and finally, her tears began to fall. "Sorry, sorry," was all that she could say as she dashed past Skip and out into the cold autumn afternoon. Chapter 8. For days, Skip felt terrible. Katie and Belle had been quiet all week, and Belle had cried for much of Saturday night after Marie had run out with Scruffy. At first, he thought that they were mourning the loss of the dog. He was cute, furry, and playful after all. But as the days went on, he realized that it was about more than just Scruffy. Katie and Belle had liked Marie. Marie had given them her time, her care, her interest. Skip had just been shocked to see her there in his home, although he was certain that he wouldn't have been any more amenable to her presence had she asked him beforehand. This wasn't genuine anger at Marie, it was his own sense of shame. It was a shame he had been handed at birth. A shame he had grown up with, the shame that was still his even now that he was a man. He lived in a one-room shack with his sisters, he always had. His first instinct on seeing Marie standing at the stove was that she was judging him. How could she not be judging him? Everything the girls had told him, however, described a woman who had been at home in their meager surroundings, who had kneeled on the rug without making a fuss so that she might sit in front of the fire with the girls. One who had taken them out for a walk, and who had happily returned later to make them all a hot drink. Just because she had come from a family who had more than he had ever known, did that really mean that she could only ever judge him? Just because that is what the majority would do in her position, did that accurately describe her? Did that accurately describe Marie Bamber? And if it didn't, had he just lost the only hint of friendship he'd ever really known in Blue Sky Falls? More than a week later, Skip walked Katie and Belle to school on his way to the sheriff's office in town, where he was replacing a large section of rotten porch around the back. These days, even the sheriff, the most suspicious man in town, trusted Skip Crowley. Things sure had turned around, and he knew, if things carried on as they were going, he would soon have enough behind him to leave the one-room shack behind and move the girls into a nice little house, a real house, in town. It sure would be easier to get to his work every morning if he was closer to it. The edge of the woodland now seemed so remote. Just as he was about to say goodbye to the girls, to hand them over to the care of the cold but strangely effective Miss Greta Lawrence, he felt both Katie and Belle tense. He still had a hold of their hands, and it was as if they both came to a sudden stop in unison. He looked up and realized that they had both seen Marie Bamber at the same time, and standing there holding their brother's hand, neither girl knew what she ought to do. He felt suddenly shabby, mean even. He loved his sisters and they should never have to make an awkward choice because of his own outbursts. If they did, then how was he truly any better than his father had been? After all, it wasn't only alcohol that controlled families. He knew that. "Look, there's Miss Bamber," he said brightly, giving each little hand a squeeze. "Are you going to wave?" Katie and Belle immediately relaxed, both waving enthusiastically with their free hands. Marie waved back, and he could see that her smile for the girls was genuine. With something of a lighter step, both Belle and Katie made their way into the schoolroom, still waving at Marie and only sparing him the final moment when they looked back before darting in through the doorway. When Miss Lawrence disappeared inside herself, pulling the door closed behind her, Skip looked over to where Marie was standing. He was about to smile, to beckon her over, or hurry his step and join her. However, she looked at him for only a moment before seeming to make up her mind. She turned away without a smile, without a frown. Marie Bamber walked away from him, heading in the direction of her father's consulting rooms. It certainly wasn't the first time in Skip Crowley's life that someone in Blue Sky Falls had turned their back on him without so much as a kind smile. However, it was the first time it had been his fault, and he knew it. Marie had believed in him, and she had clearly gone out of her way to convince the rest of the town to believe in him too. Nobody had ever done something like that for him before, even though it was such a small thing, such a simple thing. Whatever way he looked at it, Skip had ruined it. He knew her better than to think that she would have the town turn against him. Marie Bamber was better than that. If they never spoke again, Skip was sure that he wouldn't ever be in the same circumstances. It was like a gate had been opened, and he had been able to walk through. He was a member of the town now, shaking off the chains of the past, outrunning the long shadow of his father's reputation. In so many ways, he'd been saved, and there would be no going back. However, as he watched her walking away, her head down, her slumped shoulders slightly rounded, Skip wasn't so sure that that was the most important thing anymore. He realized there and then that his own pride, his own old sense of shame that he'd somehow been unable to let go of, wasn't worth hanging on to if it meant losing the only person in Blue Sky Falls who'd ever believed in him. The only person beyond his sisters he had ever truly cared about. Chapter 9. Marie, honey. Dr. Bamber said when his daughter burst in through the consulting room door 10 minutes earlier than he had been expecting her. Sorry I'm late, Marie said, trying hard not to let her anguish show. You're not late, you're early, he began. Marie, are you crying? Her father, so tall and protective, everything a father should be, crossed the room and immediately took her into his arms. Marie leaned her head against his chest, silently crying into the thick wool of his smart waistcoat and trying with all her might to gather herself. It wasn't as if Skip Crowley was her beau, after all, was it? If he didn't like her, he didn't like her. It ought to be his business and nothing to trouble her. And yet it did trouble her, it troubled her very much. You've been quiet for days and days now, Marie. It's not like you to keep things so close to your chest. Come on, why don't you just tell me about it? Oh, Daddy, I've done it again. I jumped in with both feet and I've made another stupid mistake. Only this time I've ruined everything, absolutely everything. She felt desolate. Her heart had almost skipped a beat when Katie and Belle had waved at her. They were such lovely little girls, and she liked them very much, but there was more to it. For a moment, she thought it heralded the return of the tentative friendship she enjoyed with Skip. But when she'd looked at him, she'd seen nothing in his face which gave any sign he'd relented. Would this have anything to do with you going up to the Crowley place last week? He asked gently, and Marie nodded her head miserably in response. I thought that might be the cause of your quiet these last few days. What happened? He wasn't pleased. But you knew he wouldn't be, didn't you? I guessed as much. Pride is a hard thing to shift in a man. I should know. Remember how long it took me to admit defeat in Boston and move west? We'd have been a darn sight better off if I'd swallowed my pride back then. But I just couldn't, you see. I just wasn't able to at the time. I'm sorry, honey, but you just have to let another person come to the idea on their own. I know you care about him, I know that you're kind-hearted, but you've never been where he is. You've never stood in his shoes. Marie, it can't be easy to trust others when you've come up hard like Skip Crowley has. Just give him time, he trailed off. Or not, he gently released her as the door to the consulting rooms opened and Skip walked in. Skip, come on in, her father said and sounded a little awkward. Marie hurriedly dried her face with her handkerchief and blew her nose loudly. Her father had been right, and she knew that it was time for her to apologize, not Skip. She'd marched into his world without a second thought to his own pride, his own feelings, and she'd done so after having done it already once before. Why could she not have learned from the first time? Marie braced herself and looked at Skip, absolutely sure that she was the one he had come to see. Daddy, could you give us a minute please? She asked, knowing she couldn't have this conversation in front of him. For his part, Dr. Bamber looked genuinely relieved to have been released from the awkwardness of the moment. Of course, he said and began to retreat. It's good to see you, Skip, he added with a smile before disappearing into his consulting room and closing the door behind him. Marie, he began. I really wanted to say that she said, talking at the same time. They were suddenly both silent, each wanting to apologize, each pausing to let the other go first. Marie bit her bottom lip in a bid to stop laughing. It was amusing, yes, but she knew that her laughter would be full of nerves rather than mirth. Marie, I'm sorry. I guess I was surprised to see you standing in my house. Well, my shack, he said, and she watched as he closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. I'm afraid that's the problem. It is a shack. I live in a shack, and I didn't want you to see it. I didn't want you to know where I really come from. You don't really have anything to apologize for, Skip. I'm foolhardy when I get an idea in my head, and I trot along and follow it until I've got everything done to my satisfaction. My satisfaction isn't always everybody else's, and I know that I run roughshod over other people's feelings sometimes just because I think I know what's best for them. You must think that I'm a busybody, she said and laughed self-deprecatingly. I would never think that, Skip said, but he looked down as he spoke, and Marie laughed. All right, maybe I did think that once. But that was a long time ago. He laughed and twiddled with his hat in his hands. When I saw you the other day in my house, that was just my own fear, my own dread of being judged. I've been judged my whole life, Marie, by everybody in this town except you. When I saw you standing in the middle of my house, I know I just assumed. But right then, right at that moment, I felt like I had lost that one little piece of something special. I mean, how could you stand in that little place and not judge the man who would see his sisters live like that? I don't want to have to defend myself, Skip. I don't want to beg you to believe that I don't judge you, because I really don't. Or at least not in the way that you think, she said and decided to be brave at last, to tell him it all. You see, when I think of you, I do judge you in some way. I see a young man who has had the weight of the world on his shoulders, probably for his entire life. I wonder, when I look at you, how I would have managed to raise my little sisters, Carly and Susie, if I'd been in your position. If my daddy had been your daddy, how would I have coped? The truth is, I wouldn't have. But you did, you are doing. You put your sisters before yourself and you have done everything you can to look after them, and you know what? You have looked after them. They're safe, they're warm, they're fed, and they have a home. I look at you and I see all the things I've never had to do, all the things I do not believe I would have been able to do myself, and I am in awe of you. So, yes, I do judge you. I judge you to be a very strong, very fine man. If a bit proud and belligerent, he said and smiled at her sheepishly, boyishly. A little, but that still doesn't excuse my own pushy ways. And I am pushy, I know that. If you can admit to pride and belligerence, I can admit to interfering. Marie laughed too, her skin feeling strangely taut from crying as she tried to smile. So, now that our flaws are out in the open, will you let me apologize? Let's forget about apologies and just be friends again. Marie felt hopeful again, albeit a little exhausted by the high drama of the last few minutes. We really are friends, aren't we? He said and gave her the most curious look. Marie realized that he'd never had a friend before. Of course, we are, she said and held back tears. She wanted to throw herself into his arms but knew she couldn't. So, you'll come out to my place on Saturday afternoon and eat with us? It would mean so much to the girls. And me, he added. It would mean so much to me. Yes, I would like that, she said a little breathlessly. What shall I bring? Just you. I've had to cook all my life, so I'm pretty good at it, he said as he grinned, and she was reminded of his extraordinary handsomeness. Then I'll look forward to it. And I promise I won't interfere, not once. And I won't fall into a prideful mood. Deal, Marie said and humorously thrust out her hand, enjoying the feel of his skin when he took it into his own. Deal, he said and then turned to leave. Chapter 10. Far from being an impoverished place, the shack was warm and inviting when she arrived late on Saturday afternoon. She'd seen the girls peering out of the window as she made her way through the woodland, their little cheeks almost pressed up against the glass. They'd both answered the door excitedly, standing there side by side and smiling up at her. They really were the most adorable children. There was nothing to tell of the sadness of their lives thus far. There was a fire burning brightly in the hearth, a fire which the girls immediately told her they'd set themselves. I set the kindling, Katie began. Yes, but I made the little coils of newspaper to go underneath it, Belle piped up. And I lit it, Katie went on. And I put the firewood on once it had taken a hold. And I pulled the fire guard across because Skip needed Katie to help him with the potatoes. Belle said with a flourish. Well, you are two very capable young ladies, that's for sure. And it's so lovely and warm in here. It really was warm, and Marie felt very at home. The room looked a little different than it had done the first time. Not vastly different, but it was clear that Skip had added one or two finishing touches in the last days. The large rug in front of the fire was new, a wonderful bright red pattern that gave the room such a cozy feel. There were some little pillows on the couch as well, a similar shade of red, all very wintry and inviting. With a little flush of pleasure, Marie wondered if it was all for her benefit. When they're a little older, I'll be teaching the girls how to cook, Skip called from across the other side of the room where he stood at the stove peering into a bubbling pan. Maybe in a year or two, he added, and Marie could see the vaguest hint of reticence in his eyes. He was trying to give the girls some confidence, some skills, but it still worried him. He was their brother, and a good brother at that, but Marie realized then that he was also the only true parent that Katie and Belle had ever known. She found herself struck once again by the great responsibilities of his young life. What are you cooking? Marie asked conversationally as she settled down on the couch with the girls. Chicken pie, potatoes, vegetables, and gravy. Oh, yes, and some apple tart for after. He seemed rather proud of his choice. You made the pie? Marie asked, somewhat astounded. Yes, it's just pastry with chicken and slivers of potato inside with a sauce, he said and shrugged. I did tell you I could cook. You did, but I didn't imagine that you would be able to cook better than I can. She laughed. Please tell me you know how to make a simple pie, Marie, he said, chuckling. I make pastry, she said, and trailed off for a moment. And I can cook a chicken, I think. But you can't put it all together and make a pie? I've honestly never tried. She felt her cheeks reddening a little as she looked down. She felt like a pampered fool. I know I'm giving myself an excuse, but I'm in a house where my mother always cooks, and if she doesn't, my oldest sister always took over. And the next sister down, Carly. I suppose I have gotten away with it thus far. Do you like to cook? I don't really know. I expect I would if I had the kitchen to myself and one or two ideas of my own. Really, mealtimes are a kind of pandemonium in our house. Somebody always forgets to set the table, something is usually burning, and Mama has usually forgotten to put something on the stove which ought to have been put there 20 minutes before, and we're served that halfway through the meal. I suppose you've heard the phrase too many cooks spoil the broth? Then I guess I have that to look forward to when Katie and Belle start taking over, he laughed. Leaving him to get on with his preparations, Marie spent the next half an hour chattering happily with Katie and Belle about school and their friends. She was astounded to discover that their friends included Carly and Susie, her own sisters. Neither one of her sisters had mentioned it before, but then why would they? They were all just children who got on with the world around them and enjoyed every day without the constant interference of adults. The meal, when he set it out on the small table, was just about the best she'd eaten in a long time. The pie was perfect, the pastry light and buttery, and the chicken resting in a lovely savory sauce, thick and filling. Everything was so wonderful, Marie said honestly when they'd finished eating. I think I'd be too afraid to cook for you now. But you would want to cook for me sometime? He asked and gave her a boyish, mischievous look. I would, she said, feeling her stomach fluttering. If you'd risk it, I mean. I think it'd be worth the risk. I think you would be worth the risk, he added with meaning. Skip, can we boil our own water for washing the pots and pans? Katie asked, rising to her feet like a little woman. Not this time, Skip said, and once again, Marie could see his reticence. His care for the girls was so instinctive. It was so protective and masculine that she wondered suddenly if there would be room in his arms for her too. She realized there and then that she hoped so. I'll get the water ready, then one of you can wash, and one of you can dry, and then the two of you can put everything away, all right? All right, they said as one, and Skip left the table for a moment to set some water to boil. Is there anything I can do? Marie asked, and then began to laugh. Which is just an offer, not interference, I promise. Maybe next time, Marie. Tonight, you're my guest. He stood at the stove with his back to her, so broad and muscular, and looked over his shoulder to smile. I wish Scruffy had come to dinner, Belle said as the sisters stood patiently waiting by the sink for their brother to have the water boiled. Yes, me too. I miss Scruffy, Katie added. Scruffy would have made a nuisance of himself sitting under the table squeaking until somebody fed him a piece of chicken pie. I'm afraid that's what he does in our house. Marie laughed. She felt a part of something, and she liked it. It was something different from being a part of her own family. This was something of her own, a friendship, a joining of her own making. Do you give him pieces of pie under the table, Marie? Belle asked, her little face full of wonder. We all do. My mama made a rule that the dog is supposed to be in the yard when we eat, and nobody is supposed to feed him from the table. To this day, that has never happened. Scruffy is always under the table, and each and every one of us, even my mama, sneaks something beneath the tablecloth every so often. It's a wonder he's not the fattest dog in the world. He only gets away with it because he's so cute and he knows he is. I wish I could see Scruffy again, Katie said in a wheedling tone. Well, maybe we should ask Marie to come for a walk with us all tomorrow after church? Maybe Scruffy could come too. Skip turned again to look at her, raising his eyebrows hopefully. I would love to. And I know I can speak for Scruffy too. Marie smiled as the girls whooped with delight. When the girls were finally busy with washing the pots and plates, Skip led Marie back to the warmth of the fire. They sat on the rug, and Marie could feel her heart beating. She'd never been more aware of it in her life. Thank you for giving me another chance, Marie, Skip said, speaking low so that the girls couldn't hear them over the clanging and splashing. I'm glad you came. I'm glad I came too. And you gave me another chance too, she said and looked at him shyly. Suddenly, all her boldness was gone, and she found herself looking into the brown eyes of a confident, fully grown man. She knew her cheeks were blazing red, but she hoped the roaring fire could be thought responsible. Can I kiss you? He asked in a whisper, and Marie just nodded, not trusting herself to speak. After a quick glance to be sure his sisters were fully occupied, Skip put his large hand on the side of her neck and gently drew her to him. He kissed her, and it was the most wonderful, gentle thing she'd ever felt. He drew back, but Marie leaned forward further, wanting another kiss before he released her. Skip obliged with a longer, slightly more passionate kiss this time, broken only when they heard the girls both squeal with delight. Chapter 11. It soon became their habit to walk every Sunday after church, taking the girls and Scruffy with them. With their initial misunderstandings behind them, their friendship had grown at the same rate as their burgeoning love for each other. For almost a month, Skip had been a regular feature at the Bamber family dinner table after their Sunday walk, and Marie was so proud of the way he had taken it all in his stride. She had dreaded making him feel awkward again, but the moment he experienced a chaotic Bamber family meal for himself, he soon settled in. On the very first dinner, her mama had breathlessly asked him to set the table. Since the girls had wandered off, Marie was busy preparing a jug of peach tea, and the potatoes were burning. Skip had seemed pleased for something to do and strangely welcome, given a task to do just like any other member of the family. Katie and Belle had been in their element, meeting up with their school friends, Carly and Susie, and racing about the garden with Scruffy. So, when Skip spoke to her outside the church on Sunday morning and told her they couldn't go for their usual walk, Marie had felt immediately flattened. Oh, yes, of course, she said uncertainly. Don't look like that. Skip said and laughed. We have somewhere else to go is all. Somewhere else? Yes. Me too. Yes, you, me, and the girls. I'm not sure Scruffy should come with us this time, but I'll give him an extra potato under your mama's table to make up for it later. He was grinning, his deep golden hair a little long and in need of a cut, his brown eyes shining with excitement. But where are we going? Just take my hand and trust me, he said, and then he looked for Katie and Belle. Come on, girls, we've got somewhere to be. You'll see Scruffy when we get back. The four of them set off with a promise to Marie's mother that they wouldn't be late for dinner. They walked through the town on that bitterly cold but bright winter's day, the main street deserted. Everyone was still in the churchyard chattering with friends and neighbors, and as they walked hand in hand, Marie had the strange, wonderful sense that they had blue sky falls all to themselves. We've been walking for 10 minutes. Marie said with girlish impatience. We've been walking for 5, Skip said and laughed, holding her hand tighter as the girls walked arm in arm behind them. "But we're here now, you'll be pleased to know," he went on, stopping at a white wooden gate and opening it. Where are we going?" "I have the keys to my new home, Marie." "Girls, did you hear that?" His eyes were bright as his sisters tore into the garden. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure I could get it. I guess I wanted it to be a surprise." "It's lovely," Marie said, seeing no more than the garden at that moment. "There's a house too." Skip was laughing. "Come on, let's go inside and you can tell me what you think." He strode ahead, unlocking the door of a small but neat two-story house. It was painted white, just like the fence and gate, and Marie realized she'd never noticed the house before. It was in the center of town, just a short walk along the street from her own house. It was set back a little, with a fair garden at the front and along the sides. They all entered the house in silence, Marie and the girls seeming to hold their breath. They walked into an entrance hall with a little table, just perfect, Marie thought, for a vase of flowers when the spring came. There was a staircase ahead of them and several doors leading off the entrance hall. "This is the sitting room," he said, taking her hand and leading her through the first door. "Oh, good, there's a fireplace." Katie squealed excitedly. "But, where do we sleep?" Belle looked confused. "Upstairs. There are 2 bedrooms, Belle. Can you believe that? You girls will have a room of your own. What do you think about that?" Skip asked, crouching to gather the girls to him. "Will we really live here?" Katie's voice was choked with emotion, and Marie was so touched by it that her own eyes filled with tears. "Yes, this is going to be our home from tomorrow. We'll move our things out of the shack, and we'll live here." "Forever?" Belle asked as if she couldn't take it all in. "Forever," Skip said and held them to him. Marie looked down at the little group. 3 siblings who had taken on the world in one. She'd never been so in love in her life. "But, where will you sleep?" Katie asked. "In the other bedroom upstairs." "By yourself?" Belle asked with a hint of concern in her young voice. "Won't you be scared?" "No, because hopefully, I'll have someone by my side," he said and rose to his feet, ruffling his sister's hair. "Go on then, have a good look around, girls. You can go anywhere you like." And with that, they darted away. Marie could hear their feet as they pounded up the wooden staircase. "I mean it, Marie," he said, turning to her when they were finally alone. "I want you here with me. I couldn't have done any of this without your interference," he said and wrapped his arms around her. "Do you mean it? Really?" Marie was breathless. Did he mean to marry her? "Of course, I mean it. I love you, Marie, and I want you to be my wife if you'll have me." "Of course, I will." "Oh, my goodness. What a day. So many surprises," she flung her arms around his neck. "Of course, I'll marry you. I love you so much, Skip. You're the most wonderful man I've ever met. How could I not feel safe and loved with a man who works so hard to protect his family? How could I not love you with every fiber of my being? Then let me kiss you before the girls come flying back down," he said and took hold of her chin, tilting her face towards his own before kissing her with all the passion that a relieved young man could muster. Epilogue. "It seems like an age we've lived here without you," Katie said, clapping her little hands with delight as Skip carried Marie over the threshold. "We've made your room real pretty," Belle added. "We've used the same flowers we put in the church too." "Oh, you girls are just wonderful. I'm so pleased to finally be here," Marie said as Skip set her down. In the months until their spring wedding, Marie had, of course, been a regular visitor. They'd still walked every Sunday and still had their Sunday dinner with Marie's parents. But this was her home now, and she was every bit as excited as the girls that this day had finally come. "Welcome home, my love," Skip whispered into her ear, making the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "It's good to be home," she said, turning to him, wanting him to kiss her and knowing she'd have to wait a while. "We just have to make sure everything's straight up there." "Come on, Belle," Katie said, holding out her hand. The girls dashed off, their excited chatter filling the little house. "I'm so proud of you, Skip. I'm so proud of everything you've achieved. And I'm so proud to be your wife at last. This is the best day of my life. I guess I never thought things would turn out so well for me. I never thought I'd love this town and be such a part of it. And I guess I never thought I'd ever find such a beautiful wife for myself either." It sure was a good day when the Bamber family rolled in from Boston. He pulled her to him and kissed her passionately, his hands traveling down her back, letting her know just how much he wanted her. "I love you, Skip. I've always loved you, from that very first day. I could see your care, your determination, and I knew I'd never see such strength in any other man in all the world. This is the best day of my life too." She had tears in her eyes and laughed as she brushed them away. "I love you too, Marie. I'll always love you," he said hoarsely before kissing her again. "Marie. Marie," the girls were calling out from upstairs. "Coming," she called back. "I guess you'll have to get used to this," Skip said with a smile. "I'm already used to it. This is the life I always wanted. Come on, they're waiting for us." And with that, they dashed hand in hand up the stairs of their new home. Thank you for listening to this Indiana Wake audiobook. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to Indiana Wake and Friends so you never miss future free audiobooks and new adventures.